On August 21, 1942, the humid air clung heavily around Guadalcanal's coastline, where American Marines prepared anxious defenses, believing an unseen enemy approached relentlessly during those tense early days. Japanese commanders, confident in their own superiority, expected swift triumph, dismissing their opponents as untested youths. They anticipated breaking American resolve quickly, ignoring every warning offered by experienced observers watching unfolding movements. Japanese planners, relying on earlier encounters in the Pacific, convinced themselves spiritual strength outweighed material firepower, assuming American Marines lacked determination. Their soldiers believed devotion and discipline granted invulnerability, allowing confidence to overshadow caution. They underestimated the brutal jungle conditions, failing to grasp how terrain neutralized advantages, demanding humility alongside courage. Marines holding positions near Lunga Point sensed danger, yet they remained calm, understanding mistakes invited disaster. They strengthened foxholes, adjusted equipment carefully, and studied nearby river lines, preparing for assault. Their readiness contradicted Japanese expectations entirely, showing discipline forged through training rather than cultural myth. Every hour changed Japanese perceptions slightly, although initial assumptions endured stubbornly. The dense vegetation surrounding Henderson Field created suffocating green walls, restricting sight lines and amplifying anxiety among defenders, yet discipline prevented panic. Japanese scouts moving silently through undergrowth believed surprise assured victory, ignoring difficulties that hindered coordination. Their confidence shaped every movement, revealing dangerous faith in flawed intelligence gathered hurriedly under pressure. Nightfall transformed Guadalcanal into a realm of shadows, where insects hummed endlessly and every rustle suggested imminent death. Marines listened patiently, trusting instincts refined through training, ready to fire without hesitation. Japanese commanders expected immediate American collapse once fighting began, misjudging their opponent's resolve entirely, misunderstanding crucial differences between fear and discipline. The first small skirmishes revealed surprising resistance, challenging Japanese assumptions immediately, shattering notions of American weakness. Marines fought methodically, using terrain intelligently, overwhelming attackers through coordination rather than sheer aggression. Their calm responses forced Japanese officers to reconsider earlier beliefs, although pride prevented open acknowledgement. Reality slowly eroded myth, introducing doubt subtly. Reports flowing back to Japanese battalions described unexpected determination, confusing commanders accustomed to easy victories achieved earlier. Soldiers noted disciplined firing lines, describing Marines as methodical rather than disorganized, contradicting long-held assumptions. These observations circulated quietly, challenging doctrine built upon cultural narratives rather than battlefield evidence gathered carefully. Marines guarding perimeter lines sensed mounting pressure. Understanding Japanese resolve remained formidable despite earlier misjudgments. They reinforced positions, conserving ammunition carefully, avoiding unnecessary exposure under shifting moonlight. Their steadiness under strain revealed training depth, contradicting Japanese stereotypes entirely. Every hour hardened them further, shaping momentum for future confrontations threatening both sides. Japanese officers, reviewing intercepted communications, realized American coordination exceeded earlier calculations, forcing strategic adjustments. Their belief in spiritual dominance faltered slightly, challenged by evidence contradicting propaganda delivered consistently. They debated next moves cautiously, recognizing terrain and enemy determination demanded revised tactics. Such reconsideration marked early cracks in confidence previously seen as unshakable. Marines advancing cautiously through tangled jungle encountered scattered Japanese patrols, engaging decisively despite isolation, showing unexpected adaptability. These clashes revealed American ability to absorb pressure effectively, surprising enemy officers witnessing disciplined maneuvering under chaotic conditions. Each encounter undermined Japanese narratives steadily, accelerating recognition that Guadalcanal differed significantly from earlier campaigns. Returning Japanese survivors carried unsettling stories, describing adversaries fighting calmly despite exhaustion, contradicting assumptions entirely. Their reports circulated among units preparing further assaults, introducing fear previously unimaginable. Commanders dismissed complaints publicly, yet private doubts increased steadily, indicating erosion spreading quietly through ranks. Guadalcanal's truth emerged brutally, reshaping perceptions irrevocably. Japanese military doctrine before Guadalcanal emphasized spiritual strength, believing Western soldiers lacked endurance, discipline, and willingness to sacrifice, creating a dangerously misleading foundation. Commanders insisted that courage outweighed equipment, assuming devotion ensured victory regardless of circumstances. Such thinking encouraged overconfidence, blinding planners to emerging realities already visible throughout the Pacific. Senior Japanese officers, influenced by earlier campaigns, believed American culture fostered softness, preventing sustained combat effectiveness under pressure, leading to misplaced certainty. They assessed Marines as technically competent yet emotionally fragile, assuming adversity would break them quickly. These beliefs shaped strategy significantly, creating expectations that would collapse violently once real fighting unfolded. Cultural assumptions played a crucial role, particularly the belief that spiritual superiority guaranteed dominance, overshadowing logistical concerns entirely. Japanese doctrine exalted aggression and sacrifice, celebrating decisive charges rather than cautious planning. This mindset encouraged dismissive views toward Western troops, portraying them as predictable opponents lacking deeper resolve shaped by hardship. Reports from diplomats and propagandists reinforced these misconceptions, providing selective information supporting convenient narratives, preventing balanced evaluation. Japanese commanders internalized these portrayals uncritically, building strategies upon assumptions rather than evidence. Consequently, they underestimated American adaptability, ignoring training reforms that improved discipline significantly before major Pacific operations commenced violently. Marine training emphasized marksmanship, physical endurance, and unit cohesion, creating soldiers far more resilient than Japanese observers realized initially. Yet Japanese intelligence agencies dismissed these developments, claiming Western troops favored comfort over struggle. They concluded Marines would falter quickly in jungles, ignoring rigorous exercises designed to prepare them effectively for tropical combat. These misunderstandings deepened because Japanese forces often faced poorly prepared colonial units earlier, leading to inflated confidence regarding their own capabilities. Victories in Malaya and the Philippines reinforced illusions, suggesting superiority reflected inherent cultural qualities. Such thinking misattributed success, preventing recognition of structural advantages that would not exist on Guadalcanal under changing conditions. Japanese commanders believed their infantry possessed unmatched night fighting skills, expecting Marines to panic whenever darkness concealed movement. They assumed psychological dominance guaranteed swift breakthroughs, dismissing potential American countermeasures entirely. These assumptions stifled innovation, encouraging predictable strategies vulnerable to disciplined defenders capable of responding intelligently under pressure. Marine leadership understood Japanese doctrine more clearly than Japanese officers understood theirs, offering significant strategic advantage. Intelligence briefs detailed enemy beliefs, enabling commanders to exploit predictable behavior. They anticipated bold frontal assaults, preparing interlocking fields of fire designed carefully to counter charges, transforming Japanese confidence into costly vulnerability during chaotic engagements. Before Guadalcanal, Japanese propaganda portrayed Americans as lacking moral conviction, reinforcing the notion they feared hardship profoundly. Such portrayals misled troops preparing for battle, encouraging underestimation that proved disastrous. Once confronted with determined resistance, soldiers experienced shock, realizing their opponents possessed resolve equal to their own, eroding confidence dangerously. Misreading American industrial capacity compounded strategic errors, particularly the failure to anticipate rapid reinforcement capabilities. Japanese planners believed logistical challenges would cripple marine operations, expecting hunger and disease to undermine morale quickly. They misjudged supply efficiency entirely, ignoring naval commitments supporting endurance, allowing Marines to sustain prolonged battles effectively. Marines arriving on Guadalcanal encountered hardship immediately, yet they adapted quickly, demonstrating resilience Japanese commanders never predicted. Their discipline under fire contradicted stereotypes, revealing determination forged through training rather than cultural pride. Each engagement challenged Japanese assumptions further, proving the enemy possessed capability and resolve equal to any Pacific force. The collapse of these misconceptions occurred gradually, shaped by repeated battlefield encounters revealing American tenacity, coordination, and resourcefulness. Japanese officers recognized their intelligence had failed profoundly, yet many refused public acknowledgement due to pride, prolonging strategic miscalculations. Guadalcanal shattered dangerous myths, marking a turning point redefining expectations permanently. Colonel Ichiki stepped onto Guadalcanal convinced his elite detachment would sweep the Marines aside effortlessly, believing Japanese spirit guaranteed overwhelming victory. His confidence radiated through every order, shaping a plan reliant on speed and shock. He believed resistance would crumble instantly, ignoring warnings from scouts describing determined enemy positions. Ichiki's landing force moved inland swiftly, carrying minimal supplies because commanders expected rapid triumph, demonstrating dangerous faith in flawed intelligence. Officers insisted Marines lacked courage, encouraging bold advances without reconnaissance. Ichiki embraced these assumptions wholeheartedly, believing surprise and ferocity outweighed caution, allowing confidence to override basic military principles requiring patience. The dense jungle surrounding the Tenaru River concealed American defenses effectively, enabling Marines to fortify positions without Japanese detection. Ichiki misinterpreted silence as weakness, assuming defenders hesitated due to fear. His staff encouraged immediate assault, arguing delay endangered momentum unnecessarily, reinforcing a strategy built entirely upon overconfidence rather than battlefield evaluation. Marines positioned behind log barricades maintained strict discipline, conserving ammunition carefully while observing enemy movements unfolding gradually. They recognized Japanese soldiers approached confidently, unaware of the trap awaiting them beyond the sandbar. Officers reminded their men that patience mattered greatly, ensuring volleys would break charging attackers decisively once engagement commenced violently. Ichiki believed night assaults created psychological dominance, expecting Marines to panic once confronted by coordinated Japanese charges delivered with unwavering determination. His troops prepared quietly, convinced victory was inevitable despite unknown terrain. Their morale remained high initially, fueled by propaganda celebrating spiritual strength over logistical preparation, creating dangerous complacency among seasoned veterans. The moonless night concealed movements along the riverbank, allowing Ichiki's advance elements to form attacking lines confidently, anticipating swift penetration. They assumed Marines lacked night fighting capability, an idea reinforced through repeated training lectures. This assumption proved catastrophic, ignoring American preparations designed to counter exactly such expected Japanese tactics effectively. As Ichiki's men advanced across the sandbar, their formation tightened, creating a dense target for Marine fire. They expected minimal resistance, believing rapid shock would overwhelm defenders immediately. Instead, disciplined gunfire erupted suddenly, delivering devastating impact, shattering cohesion instantly. The unexpected ferocity stunned attackers deeply, defying every earlier expectation. Marines unleashed coordinated rifle, machine gun, and mortar fire, maintaining calm precision despite darkness surrounding their positions completely. Their preparedness reflected meticulous planning, revealing understanding of Japanese doctrine rarely acknowledged. Ichiki's troops faltered under continuous volleys, discovering their assumptions about American weakness were disastrously inaccurate, undermining morale rapidly. Ichiki refused to believe the situation deteriorated severely, insisting renewed charges would break Marine lines eventually through sheer determination. He ordered additional waves forward, ignoring staggering casualties mounting quickly. His belief in spiritual power outweighed tactical logic, driving decisions fueled by pride instead of realism, worsening losses significantly. Japanese soldiers attempting to cross the sandbar again encountered intensified fire, collapsing under relentless bursts that tore through formations mercilessly. Survivors attempted withdrawal, yet officers compelled renewed advances through shouted commands. Their desperation exposed the failure of initial assumptions, demonstrating how overconfidence transformed opportunity into catastrophe under unforgiving conditions. Marine positions held firm throughout the night, illuminated occasionally by tracer fire streaking across the river, creating haunting scenes. Officers coordinated adjustments calmly, ensuring overlapping fields of fire remained uninterrupted despite chaotic surroundings. Their steadiness contrasted sharply with Japanese disarray, proving disciplined defense could dismantle even highly regarded units confidently expecting victory. By dawn, Ichiki's detachment lay shattered, surrounded by wreckage marking the scale of disaster inflicted upon them by underestimated opponents. Ichiki, facing humiliation impossible to bear within Japanese military culture, reportedly chose death rather than acknowledge failure publicly. His fate symbolized broader consequences, demonstrating how assumptions destroyed entire units before strategic reconsideration emerged. Marines holding the defensive line around Henderson Field understood the jungle offered both protection and danger, forcing constant vigilance despite exhaustion. Thick undergrowth restricted visibility severely, creating deceptive quiet moments that concealed approaching threats. Every movement required caution, demonstrating how terrain shaped morale and tactics relentlessly throughout each passing day. Daily rainstorms flooded foxholes quickly, forcing Marines to bail water constantly, preventing collapse under soaked walls. Swarming insects harassed exhausted defenders, biting relentlessly, worsening fatigue already deepening from sleepless nights. Yet discipline held firm, revealing determination strengthened by shared hardship rather than external encouragement offered by distant leaders. Improvised shelters crafted from palm fronds provided minimal comfort, yet Marines accepted discomfort stoically, understanding survival demanded resilience beyond physical strength. Canned rations tasted metallic and unpleasant, but hunger required acceptance without complaint. They learned to eat quickly, conserve water carefully, and remain prepared for sudden alarms signaling imminent danger. Patrols moved cautiously along narrow jungle paths, navigating mud, vines, and hidden ravines that threatened injury constantly, slowing progress. Marines relied heavily on instincts sharpened through training, listening for subtle sounds revealing enemy presence. Every patrol returned with heightened awareness, reinforcing understanding that Japanese forces possessed relentless determination despite earlier defeats. Machine gun crews fortified positions meticulously, aligning overlapping fields of fire across likely avenues of approach, ensuring control during nocturnal assaults. Their weapons required constant cleaning due to humidity, demanding technical precision under stressful conditions. These responsibilities reinforced camaraderie, binding crews through shared dependence on equipment reliability during prolonged engagements. Marines learned to use the jungle creatively, camouflaging positions with branches and mud, creating deceptive illusions confusing enemy scouts. They placed triplers strategically, illuminating attackers attempting stealthy approaches under thick darkness. Such ingenuity compensated for shortages, proving adaptability often outweighed numerical advantages enjoyed initially by Japanese forces. Supply shortages challenged endurance significantly, particularly when ammunition deliveries lagged due to enemy naval operations disrupting transportation routes. Marines rationed resources carefully, firing only when necessary, demonstrating discipline beyond expectations. Their restraint surprised Japanese commanders, who expected wasteful American behavior, revealing miscalculations influencing early battle assumptions strongly. Engineers strengthened defensive lines continuously, constructing barriers from logs, sandbags, and coral fragments extracted from nearby beaches under dangerous conditions. Their work often occurred under sniper fire, yet determination never wavered. These improvised fortifications transformed vulnerable terrain into defensible positions, capable of resisting concentrated assaults effectively across multiple sectors. Night attacks tested resolve intensely, with Japanese soldiers shouting war cries designed to intimidate defenders psychologically, attempting to break morale. Marines remained steady, responding with controlled bursts that disrupted charges efficiently. Their cohesion during darkness demonstrated growing confidence, contradicting earlier enemy assumptions portraying them as fragile under sustained pressure. Sickness spread rapidly due to mosquitoes, contaminated water, and oppressive heat, draining strength despite medical efforts. Still, Marines continued working tirelessly, performing duties despite fevers and fatigue, revealing inner resilience often overlooked in broader histories. This persistence impressed even hardened officers, confirming that hardships forged unshakable determination among weary defenders. Japanese forces continued probing defensive lines, seeking weaknesses through repeated assaults intended to exploit perceived vulnerabilities, yet Marines refused collapse. Each failed attack hardened American resolve further, proving discipline could counter aggression effectively. Japanese officers misinterpreted stubborn resistance repeatedly, failing to comprehend shifting momentum shaped by attrition and adaptation. Henderson Field remained the heart of Marine operations, symbolizing control over Guadalcanal and representing hope during bleak moments. Defenders understood losing it meant catastrophe, motivating relentless labor to maintain positions regardless of exhaustion. Their perseverance under constant threat demonstrated extraordinary commitment, preparing them for increasingly violent confrontations awaiting in coming months. The ridge loomed above Henderson Field, and every Marine understood its importance. because losing that high ground meant losing the airfield and surrendering the entire island to Japanese control, creating a desperate defensive atmosphere as Edson positioned his weary raiders along the uneven jungle slopes. Night descended with oppressive humidity, and the Marines listened uneasily as distant Japanese bugles echoed, signaling an approaching assault, reminding them that elite units under General Kawaguchi intended to break the American perimeter with relentless night attacks designed to shatter morale and overwhelm thinly stretched defenses. Edson walked the line with calm determination, offering steady reassurance although his exhausted men sensed looming catastrophe, since intelligence indicated the coming offensive would involve coordinated waves pushing directly at the weakest points, creating serious doubts about whether the ridge could withstand such concentrated pressure. When the first bursts of machine gun fire erupted from the darkness, Marines braced themselves, feeling the jungle vibrate with approaching footsteps, understanding the Japanese believed American forces fragile and inexperienced, which motivated their commanders to press boldly into positions they assumed would collapse easily under sustained shock. The assault struck with terrifying momentum, driving forward in tightly packed formations guided by shouted commands, prompting Marines to fire controlled volleys while falling back methodically towards secondary positions, maintaining discipline even as grenades exploded among the trees and enemy soldiers attempted to infiltrate through narrow terrain gaps. Edson adjusted his lines repeatedly, ordering small withdrawals to straighten positions and avoid encirclement, demonstrating tactical flexibility that contrasted sharply with Japanese expectations, since attackers believed a sudden breach would unravel Marine cohesion instantly, yet every fallback created stronger defensive alignment. Flares illuminated the ridge sporadically, casting chaotic shadows as Marines engaged figures charging uphill, revealing determined Japanese infantry attempting bayonet thrusts through barbed brush, though each repelled attack left bodies scattered across the slope without breaking the American defensive core. As pressure intensified, panic threatened sections of the line, but Edson's personal presence steadied wavering units, reminding them the ridge represented Guadalcanal's survival, encouraging them to hold despite diminishing ammunition and growing fear that another massive wave would soon follow. Japanese commanders believed victory imminent, interpreting temporary Marine withdrawals as signs of crumbling resistance, unaware each shift reflected deliberate tactical planning that funneled their troops into coordinated kill zones where concentrated fire inflicted devastating casualties. The night grew harsher, with rain mixing into churned earth while Marines fought hand-to-hand along narrowed trenches, discovering their enemy remained fearless yet increasingly disorganized as repeated assaults failed to exploit any weakness along the ridge's vital center. When another large force attempted a decisive breakthrough, Marine machine gunners unleashed sustained fire that tore into packed formations, demonstrating the defenders' resilience and disproving Japanese assumptions that Americans lacked stamina for prolonged night combat under extreme psychological pressure. By dawn, the ridge remained in American hands, littered with remnants of defeated attackers, revealing that Edson's defiance had shattered a key Japanese offensive, proving determination, cohesion, and adaptability could overcome numerical strength, altering enemy perceptions and reshaping the Guadalcanal campaign's future trajectory. Basilone recognized the vulnerability along the defensive line, and he moved quickly to position his machine guns where the jungle corridor narrowed, establishing overlapping fields of fire before darkness settled, knowing the Japanese would attack in great strength and try to overwhelm the Marines through relentless waves meant to fracture cohesion. As night advanced, rain soaked the gun pits and visibility dropped sharply, yet Basilone encouraged his crews to maintain readiness, reminding them the approaching assault would test every measure of endurance, because enemy commanders believed massed infantry charges could crush American positions through shock, speed, and psychological intimidation. When the first Japanese battalions emerged from the tree line, their advance sounded like a rushing tide, prompting Basilone's gunners to unleash controlled bursts, creating disciplined walls of fire that tore into dense formations, halting initial momentum yet failing to diminish the determination driving repeated frontal attacks. The guns overheated under sustained firing, forcing Basilone to crawl through mud and drifting smoke between weapon positions, replacing barrels while rounds cracked overhead, demonstrating his willingness to expose himself repeatedly so the line would maintain continuous fire, essential for preventing attackers from breaching the perimeter. Ammunition began running low as enemy soldiers pressed dangerously close, but Basilone carried belts across exposed ground despite mounting casualties nearby, delivering supplies to isolated positions that relied entirely on his efforts to keep their machine guns active during the most intense phases of the night battle. Enemy troops attempted flanking maneuvers through dense underbrush, believing they could bypass the central kill zones, yet Basilone redirected fire with precise instructions, guiding his crews to shift angles and rake hidden pockets of movement, disrupting infiltration attempts before they reached vulnerable interior sections of the marine perimeter. Grenades exploded among the machine gun pits, showering dirt and fragments across the crews, but Basilone maintained steady direction, coordinating overlapping defense that trapped attackers between converging fields of fire, gradually transforming the immediate terrain into a chaotic expanse filled with shattered formations unable to maintain coordinated pressure. Hours of continuous combat strained every defender, yet Basilone's persistence created a stabilizing presence, inspiring Marines who feared the next assault might break through, encouraging them to hold despite exhaustion, smoke irritation, and growing uncertainty about how long the line could withstand such overwhelming numerical superiority. When another massive wave surged forward, Japanese officers drove their men uphill with shouted commands, expecting American fire to falter, but Basilone synchronized his guns once more, producing a devastating barrage that stopped attackers mid-charge and prevented their momentum from reaching critical points along the ridge's central sector. Bodies piled along the approaches, yet survivors continued probing desperately for weaknesses, prompting Basilone to reposition a remaining gun manually, dragging it across rough ground so it could cover an exposed gap created earlier, sealing an opening that, if exploited, might have shattered the entire defensive structure. By late night, gun crews were depleted, wounded, or exhausted, but Basilone refused to yield, firing one weapon alone when no one else remained functional nearby, delivering steady bursts that repelled close-range assaults, proving individual resolve could sustain an entire sector when organized structure nearly collapsed. When dawn finally illuminated the battlefield, thousands of Japanese attackers lay scattered before the Marine positions, demonstrating the scale of the failed offensive, and Basilone's stand emerged as a defining moment on Guadalcanal, showing how determination, technical skill, and extraordinary courage preserved the perimeter when survival seemed impossible. Malnutrition spread rapidly through Japanese units, and soldiers found themselves unable to march effectively, because limited supply convoys rarely broke through American naval dominance, leaving entire battalions dependent on jungle plants and spoiled rice that offered almost no real nourishment during weeks of continuous hardship. Diseases such as malaria and dysentery weakened every regiment, and medical tents overflowed with men unable to stand, as exhausted corpsmen attempted to treat them without adequate medicine, illustrating how logistical collapse, rather than battlefield defeat, eroded Japan's combat strength across Guadalcanal. Rotting foliage concealed shallow water pools where mosquitoes bred relentlessly, ensuring infection rates soared, and commanders watched their divisions shrink daily, recognizing that sickness consumed soldiers faster than bullets, turning the once feared invaders into hollowed formations unable to carry out coordinated operations. Rations dropped to mere spoonfuls of rice per day, and soldiers foraged desperately across ravines seeking coconuts or roots, yet many collapsed from weakness, filling narrow trails with men unable to continue, creating a haunting landscape of suffering that reflected the island's unforgiving conditions. Night marches became nearly impossible as weakened troops stumbled along muddy ridges, and officers struggled to maintain order, realizing starvation and dehydration undermined the discipline previously associated with Japanese infantry, forcing units to abandon aggressive doctrines they once believed would guarantee victory. Some soldiers attempted fishing along isolated shorelines, but American patrols frequently disrupted these efforts, and hunger tightened its grip, leaving men gaunt, delirious, and increasingly resigned to the grim reality that reinforcements would never arrive in sufficient strength to change their fate. Corpses accumulated near makeshift camps, and survivors lacked energy to bury them properly, allowing the jungle to reclaim bodies quickly, creating an overwhelming stench that drifted across palm stands, reminding every soldier that the island itself had become a lethal enemy. Commanders issued optimistic reports to headquarters, but internal diaries revealed despair, admitting divisions could not continue offensive operations, because skeletal soldiers could not lift ammunition crates or maneuver through dense terrain without collapsing, forcing leaders to accept the slow unraveling of combat capability. Soldiers' uniforms stiffened from dirt and sweat, and tropical ulcers spread across unwashed skin, causing intense pain, while limited bandages forced medics to reuse contaminated cloth, accelerating infections and pushing many weakened men toward inevitable death far from any battlefield glory. Japanese radio operators reported rising desertion attempts, although escape was nearly impossible, and starving soldiers wandered aimlessly through ravines, hoping to find hidden supply caches, yet most collapsed from exhaustion before reaching friendly lines, illustrating how despair replaced earlier fanatic resolve. American observers noticed enemy movements becoming erratic and sluggish, confirming the collapse of Japanese endurance, and patrol reports described opponents too weak to resist effectively, demonstrating how hunger and disease achieved what months of fierce combat could not accomplish. By late 1942, Guadalcanal earned its Japanese nickname Starvation Island, because entire divisions withered into non-functional remnants and commanders finally realized their troops faced annihilation, proving the campaign was lost not solely through force of arms, but through the island's merciless assault on human survival. General Alexander Vandegrift carried the burden of a campaign without certainty, and he balanced caution with resolve, guiding his weary Marines through weeks of battle while recognizing that their survival depended on discipline, endurance, and the ability to hold fragile lines against relentless Japanese assaults across Guadalcanal's unforgiving terrain. He understood that morale required steadiness, and his calm presence reassured exhausted battalions, allowing them to trust leadership even when ammunition ran low, because he communicated confidence without illusion, reminding every Marine that their stand on the island represented a turning point, requiring unbreakable determination under continuous pressure. Vandegrift relied heavily on officers like Merritt Edson, whose tactical instincts and quiet intensity shaped critical decisions, and he valued Edson's ability to interpret jungle terrain, anticipate enemy movements, and inspire raiders and parachutists who depended on his steady command during the darkest nights of combat. Edson's leadership emerged most clearly on Bloody Ridge, where he positioned his men carefully, and he moved between gun pits while encouraging discipline, ensuring each Marine understood the importance of holding the line, because a single collapse would have opened a deadly route directly toward Henderson Field. His calm voice cut through chaos as Japanese forces surged upward, and his presence convinced exhausted riflemen to continue firing, even when ammunition dwindled, because they trusted his judgment, understanding that he recognized precisely when to commit reserves and when to tighten the defensive perimeter against overwhelming pressure. John Basilone represented another form of leadership, demonstrating courage at the front rather than from a command post, and his actions during the October assaults illustrated how individual determination could influence entire battles, because he maintained machine guns under punishing conditions and refused to abandon his position despite exhaustion. Basilone moved constantly between weapons, distributing ammunition with remarkable composure, and he repaired overheated guns under fire, ensuring overlapping fields of fire remained active, allowing his small group of Marines to repel waves of attackers who believed sheer momentum would break American defensive lines. His endurance throughout the night astonished survivors, and his refusal to retreat inspired neighboring units, showing how frontline leadership depended not only on orders, but on example, because men who witnessed his resilience found renewed strength despite fear, exhaustion, and the overwhelming noise of continuous combat. Vandegrift recognized Basilone's impact immediately, and reports from the field confirmed the scale of his contribution, demonstrating how individual heroism complemented strategic planning, proving that leadership on Guadalcanal required both disciplined command and raw bravery capable of shaping outcomes during moments of extreme danger. These three figures exemplified distinct forms of responsibility, and their combined efforts preserved Henderson Field, ensuring the Marines retained air support essential for resisting Japanese offensives, because without their coordination, the island's defense would have fractured under the immense strain of prolonged fighting. Their sacrifices demonstrated how leadership required constant vigilance, emotional control, and personal risk, as each recognized the stakes involved. Understanding the future of the Pacific rested on their ability to maintain cohesion among exhausted troops facing a determined opponent unwilling to concede any ground. Through their actions, the Marines forged a legacy defined by endurance and resolve, proving that American forces possessed the discipline and courage necessary to challenge Japan's seasoned army, and their leadership during Guadalcanal shaped the momentum that ultimately shifted the broader Pacific campaign toward Allied victory. Japanese soldiers who survived Guadalcanal returned with stories that challenged the narrative taught for years, admitting fear, exhaustion, and frustration that contradicted the image of an invincible army, revealing how brutal combat and starvation had shattered assumptions about their strength and the ease of defeating American Marines. Many confessed that terrain alone had created constant challenges, with dense jungle, swamps, and narrow ridges preventing organized advances, forcing soldiers into disjointed attacks, which exposed them to concentrated Marine fire, demonstrating that discipline and strategic positioning could overcome numerical superiority even when Japanese forces expected swift, decisive victories. Survivors spoke of relentless hunger, describing days spent foraging for roots, coconuts, or spoiled rations that offered little sustenance, noting how lack of nourishment sapped strength, slowed movement, and reduced morale, ultimately forcing units to abandon offensive plans while exposing them to deadly counterattacks. During the most critical engagements, disease emerged as another confounding factor, with malaria, dysentery, and tropical infections incapacitating soldiers faster than any combat action. And survivors admitted the high casualty rates were as much a result of illness and exhaustion as enemy fire, revealing a hidden dimension of Guadalcanal's brutal conditions. Officers reluctantly acknowledged that American defensive preparation had far exceeded expectations, with strategically placed machine guns, interlocking fields of fire, and fortified positions creating a psychological impact that unnerved even the most experienced Japanese troops, forcing repeated assaults to fail under conditions previously believed manageable. Accounts detailed the shock of encountering Marines who remained calm, disciplined, and coordinated despite fatigue, hunger, and constant danger, contradicting the Japanese belief that Americans would panic easily, proving that assumptions about cultural weakness were profoundly mistaken and that resilience could emerge unexpectedly under pressure. Some survivors describe Basilone's stand specifically, recounting how concentrated machine gun fire and methodical responses halted multiple frontal assaults, demonstrating individual bravery combined with teamwork, forcing Japanese units to reassess their tactical approach, while realizing that heroism could decisively influence the outcome of seemingly hopeless situations. Colonel Ichiki's defeat at the Tenaru River remained a cautionary tale, and soldiers admitted that overconfidence and rigid adherence to doctrine contributed to catastrophic losses, revealing how pride and assumptions about enemy inferiority could override practical assessment, leading to disastrous outcomes for well-trained, disciplined forces. Japanese diaries reflected despair and frustration with supply failures, communication breakdowns, and the inability to coordinate effectively under extreme jungle conditions, confirming that logistical collapse compounded battlefield setbacks, creating a cumulative effect that transformed Guadalcanal into a struggle for survival rather than a conventional campaign for territorial control. Survivors frequently mentioned the psychological toll, noting that repeated failed attacks, witnessing comrades fall from disease or fire, and enduring starvation caused morale to plummet, forcing soldiers to question leadership decisions openly, exposing cracks in confidence that had been invisible before prolonged combat under relentless pressure. Some officers admitted privately that the myth of spiritual superiority had been dangerous, acknowledging that courage alone could not substitute for planning, supply, or adaptability, and that Guadalcanal had revealed the limitations of relying on doctrine rooted in pride, rather than practical assessment of battlefield conditions and enemy capability. Ultimately, these voices contributed to historical understanding by showing how misjudgment, environmental challenges, and disciplined opposition combined to destroy the invincibility narrative, leaving Japanese forces humbled, exhausted, and profoundly changed, illustrating that Guadalcanal was not only a tactical victory but also a psychological turning point in the Pacific War. Guadalcanal's outcome reshaped perceptions of American military capability, proving that disciplined training, leadership, and resilience could defeat seasoned Japanese forces, challenging long-held assumptions about invincibility and demonstrating that determination and adaptability often outweighed raw experience or perceived spiritual superiority in modern jungle warfare. The defense of Henderson Field became a symbol of courage, showing how Marines, despite exhaustion, starvation, and disease, could maintain cohesion under relentless pressure, while Japanese forces struggled against logistical failures, demonstrating that preparation and morale often determined outcomes more than numerical strength alone. Stories of Colonel Ichiki's defeat, Edson's leadership, and Basilone's heroism highlighted the importance of individual initiative combined with coordinated unit tactics, revealing that leadership could shape entire campaigns by influencing morale, tactical execution, and the capacity to absorb intense enemy pressure while maintaining a defensive advantage. Guadalcanal taught Japanese commanders that assumptions based on cultural stereotypes were dangerously flawed, because American Marines displayed remarkable adaptability, patience, and resilience, forcing enemy forces to reconsider strategies relying on shock, aggression, and numerical superiority that previously succeeded in other Pacific theaters. The prolonged engagement underscored the effectiveness of combined arms and coordinated defensive planning, as Marines integrated artillery, machine guns, and field fortifications with mobility and communication, demonstrating that modern warfare relied on organization, adaptability, and situational awareness rather than abstract notions of courage or perceived spiritual strength. American success reshaped Allied doctrine, illustrating that disciplined troops could endure extreme, environmental hardships while repelling a determined and experienced adversary, establishing a model for subsequent Pacific campaigns where preparation, training, and leadership became decisive factors in sustaining operations over hostile terrain and against superior numbers. Guadalcanal also revealed the psychological impact of tenacious defense, as Japanese troops encountered unexpected resistance, sustained casualties, and logistical failure, producing fear and confusion that undermined offensive capability, proving that morale and adaptability could tip the balance even against forces considered superior in prior engagements. The island became a proving ground for American leadership, as Vandegrift, Edson, and other commanders balanced strategy, logistics, and frontline guidance, demonstrating how coherent command structures and personal example could sustain morale and combat effectiveness, highlighting lessons essential for future operations across the Pacific theater. Media and military reports emphasized heroism and sacrifice, reinforcing the narrative that ordinary Marines, through discipline, courage, and perseverance, could achieve extraordinary results, establishing Guadalcanal as a foundational story that inspired recruitment, morale, and confidence throughout the Allied forces during subsequent campaigns. Guadalcanal shattered the myth of invincibility, forcing Japan to re-evaluate its offensive strategy while accepting the limits imposed by terrain, logistics, and attrition, proving that assumptions about American weakness were catastrophically incorrect and that underestimated opponents could impose decisive strategic consequences. The legacy of Guadalcanal endured in training, doctrine, and historiography, serving as a case study in resilience, leadership, and adaptation, showing future military planners that preparation, innovation, and courage could overcome both environmental challenges and an enemy previously deemed unbeatable in combat. Ultimately, Guadalcanal transformed the Pacific War, establishing the Marines' reputation for effectiveness under extreme conditions, destroying dangerous myths, and demonstrating that careful planning, leadership, and relentless determination could alter the course of history, shaping Allied strategy and ensuring that the myth of Japanese invincibility would never endure.